The challenges for fair housing today are dramatically different than they were 50 years ago. And when you think about some of the recent occurrences in our nation, two things come to mind. The changes in the market for rental housing and the opportunities for home ownership. Again, 50 years ago, there was blatant discrimination, and those opportunities were limited just by people saying you can't live in this neighborhood or you can't have access to this type of housing. Today, it's a different kind of dynamic. So when you talk about rental housing, the problem you have is, particularly for people of lower income, is that they're spending a very, very high percentage of their income on housing. The general rule of thumb is that you spend no more than 30% of your monthly income on your housing. For many folks of lower income, that number is well over 50%, and that's a huge burden, financial burden on them and their families, and it really makes it almost impossible to find and continue to live in quality housing. And there's overall lack of supply of housing that comes in at rental rates that will allow those families to enjoy quality housing at rates they can afford. On the home ownership front, it's a different paradigm. From the Great Recession in 2008, the level of black home ownership declined dramatically, and unfortunately the reduction was significantly impacted by folks losing their homes to foreclosure. We all read and heard about the various large financial institutions that have been in trouble and been assessed fines for their practices, and those were discriminatory in many cases, where they were providing financing to African American families that was not favorable, that ended up having a higher cost in the long run. And when the Great Recession hit, it just really had a significant adverse impact on those families and their ability to maintain their homes. So the home ownership rate, although it had grown over the past 50 years significantly, it took a tremendous hit as a result of the recession, and that was compounded by the fact that many of our larger lenders, including the two major governmental-related entities, the Federal National Mortgage Association, Fannie Mae, and Federal Home Mortgage Association, Freddie Mac, were involved with some of those practices that were clearly and blatantly discriminatory against families, but the private sector was taking advantage of market opportunities as they proceeded, and they really were not concerned about the long-term impact on families. So you had significant declines in home ownership rates. We're seeing people living in rental units paying a lot more of their income than they should be or can afford to, and those are two of the forms of a lack of fair housing policy that are impacting our society today. But even with the funding levels that have declined over time, the national housing policy has really been fairly stagnant in terms of innovation and creativity, and really trying to understand the challenges and relate those challenges to workable solutions, and then channeling resources to workable solutions. So a lot of the programs that did exist 30, 40, 50 years ago continue to exist today, and they really haven't been modified or updated or really reviewed in the context of how people are living today, the challenges they face today, and the way to better address affordable housing in today's environment.